Ne jana go wo wo be ha den ste. Ne jana go den go be ha den ste. Hey yana hey 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 yana. Ne jana go wo wo yorth gwe be ha den ste. Ne jana go wo wo be ne tage.
أكون شيء عجبي شيء نعيش شعود كهولش أكوديت أول بها إسرائيلية شد نو جوي السب بالكانك جو بيخشنا أول جنو يجا على إن ليش ننا هلون أولياء بأكون سن ليش شندا والخارج كتايش أول به شياجة إن شخا هذا بقول جن بجنو جو خد إسات أول نني خد باكنسن أحيانا.
When I hear the phrase "I'll with a bit," I think of when you are out cheering and you're trying to catch one of those last withers, and he flies through the air, headbutts you in the eye, leaves you with a nice bruiser, and then you continue shearing. You get it done. You figure out a way to make it work despite everything that may be mounting against you. That's what I think about. And then you plan the next butchering.
Man, there's a song from Bruce Springsteen, and it's our anthem song, because when we're down and out, I put that song on, and it says there's going to be hard times coming, there's going to be good times coming, but there's also going to be hard times coming. Swing that ball at me, because I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work as hard as I can to do what needs to be done. It's just being honest and upfront and working your butt off. Bring that wrecking ball on is all I can say, and that's what the word is that.
Thank you for joining us once again here for our Navajo Cultural Arts online virtual lecture series, Tall with a Bit. Today, I'm excited to bring on one of my former professors over at UC Davis. I met Hulleah, I think it's been 10 years now. I can't believe it's been that long, but 10 years ago over at the Davis campus for UC Davis. I was doing a campus tour over there when I was thinking about joining different PhD programs, and I ran into Hulleah in the hallway, and I remember the then faculty chair was like, "Oh, you have to meet Hulleah." And I said, "Oh, okay, great. Who's Hulleah?" And she's like, "Oh, she's another Navajo. You Navajos like all hang together." And it's I've been fortunate enough to live in a lot of places where I found really supportive individuals from our Navajo Nation, and Hulleah is definitely one of them. So without further ado, Hulleah, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning, Dr. Amy. My name is Hulleah Tsinhnahjinnie, born into the Bear Clan of the Tuskegee Nation, born for Tsinhnahjinnie, adopted into the Killer Whale Clan of Metlakatla, adopted into the Eagle Clan of Metlakatla, and Hunka to Muriel Antoine, South Dakota.
One of the rationales that I wanted to bring Hulleah on is not only because she speak a lot to our photography emphasis that we have here over at the college in our BFA program, but she has a unique understanding of visual sovereignty and how to work through the pathways of being an artist in academia, which is not always easy. I mean, she also works up at Davis with the Gorman Museum, which is getting a new home. Am I not correct?
we're going to an older building that's going to be renovated completely.
That's
And it's going to
exciting.
be next to the Arboretum. Yeah, we're really excited.
Okay, could you tell us a little bit about the connection of the Gorman Museum and where that started out from?
Well, and the founders of Native American Studies, Jack Forbes, Dave Risling, Carl Gorman, and Sarah Hutchinson. So we're looking at 1969, and so those four basically started. It wasn't a department then; it was more of a what would you call it? I'm forgetting my words this morning. But in the program, each had their own speciality. Jack Forbes, of course, history, incredibly published. Dave Risling, California, a native history. Sarah Hutchinson, Southeast, Cherokee, and Carl Gorman, of course, Navajo. And he had been out here, he had been in the Bay Area and was living, and Dave Risling and Jack Forbes and Sarah tapped his shoulder and said, we're starting this program, when you want to come out? And he said, sure. And so he taught the first art classes at UC Davis in indigenous art. And so he worked here for 3 years before leaving, and he left in '73. And he would teach his art history classes on Indian art, native art. He would bring in samples from his own collection, and he would put them into what was back then the trailers, and they had a little gathering area. And he would put up sculptures or paintings or things like that, or people would bring things in and he would put them up for a while. And so in a teasing way, of course, they call it the Gorman Museum. But that's the way you create space and presence, as you name something. And so when the program moved over to Hart Hall, they said, well, we have the museum. And the administrators were like, oh, okay. But you named something and you created that space. And so they gave space to the Gorman Museum when it moved to Hart Hall, its own space. Nothing fancy. George Longfist was the first director, and he was the director till I think it was 2001, 2000. And then I took over in 2004. So when I came, I decided that we needed to have exhibitions that people could contemplate over, and that they could be included in course work. And so usually we have 3 exhibitions a year. And we really focus on giving a solo exhibition, because artists really need solo exhibitions for their resume. And then we try to bring in artists from outside. We don't focus on California native artists because there are other museums that do that, but not saying that we don't show California native artists, but bringing outside influence so that people can see what's out there.
So I guess one of the things that we wanted to know was about how did you get introduced into the arts? We know that I know you as a photographer, as a screen printer, and as a beater. You work extensively in those areas, but where was the origin for your experience with the arts?
Well, pretty much I was born into it. So my father is a painter. He went to the Santa Fe Indian Art School, and his were Pablito Velarde, that whole Southwest gang, and Oklahoma painters. V.T. Nyazi, yeah. And these were his classmates. He really was enmeshed in that Southwest painting school. And So when I grew up, all those painters would come to the house and visit. Some would come down and this is when we were living in Phoenix, would come down and stay for a while, and they'd paint together, then they'd go off and sell their paintings. And so Harrison Begay would come in, you know, just different artists would come in. A.D. Dodge would come visit. Like I said, Pablito Velarde would come visit. So when I was growing up, I had Native American art history at home.
Your living room.
In my living room, yeah. And, you know, when you're a kid, you know, you kind of hang back and you listen to the stories, or you watch them paint. So I already had a solid base of art education, which was pretty unmovable. Yeah, because these white artists, European artists, were, yeah, peripheral.
How did you start to transition into photography?
At the high school, I checked out a book. We must have had a great librarian. I don't know who the librarian was. I can't remember. Because it was a book that was published in 1969, and it was called The House of Bondage. And it was about it was photographs of a South Africaner of apartheid. And this was 1969. And of course, you can imagine the American Indian movements happening, all of it's coming on at television, which we could only get at night. We could only get reception at night, in the evening. Wounded Knee and things like that, Alcatraz, things like that were happening. So seeing this book and seeing that this oppression was international and not just specifically towards Native people opened my eyes. You know, I was in high school and I was looking at this book, and I kept it for a long time, you know, kept rechecking it out just to look at the pictures. And basically what I was doing was comparing it to the conditions on the Navajo reservation. And I compared some of the towns with the border towns like Gallup and Flagstaff and Farmington, how we were being treated. And it was the same thing. So that was really intense. And realizing that you could take an image and transfer that kind of message, a political message, a human message, that was power. So I saw power in photography, power in the image, a power for possible change. And when I saw those photographs, I knew that's what I wanted to be, was a photographer. And so when I graduated from high school, my mom and dad, you know, we come from a modest means family. They asked me what I wanted for graduation. And I said, a Nikon camera. And they said, okay. So my dad, who would sell his paintings to Malarkey and Gallup, went and traded paintings for a camera and film. And so that's how I got my start. And so there was Ernest Cole as one of the first influencers. And then because we lived at Rough Rock, and Rough Rock, of course, you know, being the first school to teach bilingual education, bicultural education, you know, being a pilot school for, you know, yeah, a new type of school. You know, I was like super lucky not to go to boarding school. So I landed on my feet and went to Rough Rock, you know, had Navajo classes and things like that. They had called my father back to illustrate the books there. And he worked with Hope Dinapsosi there and other artists creating a curriculum. So the book were influences on how one creates one's own presence, on how one creates one's own image. My dad was, he illustrated the Navajo history book. They illustrated books on certain ceremonies, sort of like how to do books because they were being lost. And this was, the 60s, mid 60s. But also we were having visitors come to Rough Rock. We had a little dirt airport. Politicians would come in and different people would hear about the school and observe how is this being done. We had visitors from First Nations in Canada. We had Maori coming in. Jack Forbes came in, and artists were coming in. And a photographer came in, a French photographer, a humanist photographer, Henri Cartier-Bresson. And I got to meet him just briefly. And so people were like, you need to look at his work. And so I went to the library again, checked out his books. And there happened to be a book he wrote, The Decisive Moment, which is an English translation of the book. Anyway, these influences, my father, Hooked in Atsosi, creating curriculum for a Navajo school, the first of its kind. Ernest Cole looking at South Africa and apartheid, and then this French photographer, another humanist photographer coming in. So these type of influences really created a lot of thought. And then you have the civil rights movement happening, and you have the American Indian movement happening. Vine Deloria is teaching at ASU.
Mm-hmm.
And Custard Died for Your Sins comes out. And that was, yeah. I mean, when you think about that as a mixing pot for thought, yeah.
Critical thought, right? A lot of critical self-reflection and societal reflection, and how photography can kind of be an intersect of all of that. And when was the moment that you thought that you were going to enter into academia and start working? Yeah. How did that happen?
Never in my life did I think I was going to become a professor. Never. When I was in high school at Tsinhnahjinnie, this is, back in the day, I graduated in '73, go Wildcats. The counselors weren't interested in counseling the Native students, the Navajo students, to go to college. So I was never counseled in going to college or asked what I wanted to be. My mother is very much into education. And so she was always telling us, you can always be what you want to be. And she's Seminole and Creek. So when I left high school, I didn't have a plan. I felt like education had to be hard in order to be somebody. This is my young thinking. And because art came too easy, because it would just flow. And it was like, well, okay, I want to check out what's out there. So I did a summer at Arcasante. Paolo Solori, an Italian architect, was building what would you call it? He was building a small city in Cordes Junction, and he was looking for volunteers to help build his little city. And he would build asps and everything out of concrete on the side of a cliff. And he had all these ideas about what a city should be, and so I would work in the mornings, and then at noon we would have lunch, and he would give his lectures. And of course, I would hear some of the lectures because I would fall asleep because I would work in the morning. But that, listening and seeing what he was doing gave me inspiration about architecture. And I thought, well, I want to be an architect. And then I thought, then I decided to do a quarter at Diné College, NCC back then. And I met some really nice people there. And then there, I saw a flyer for the Institute of American Indian Arts. That's when I decided, okay, I think I'm an artist.
I'm not going to fight this anymore.
I'm not going to fight this. And yeah, and of course, my dad had gone there a long, long time before, before it was a government institution, and what it was in the 30s. And so I went there. I went there for about 3 years. Yeah. And then from there, I transferred to California College of Arts and Crafts. And that was really an eye-opener. Well, both places were really eye-openers. The Institute of American Indian Arts was the most valuable networking I ever had. I still have friends from that time. I meet people in Alaska, Minnesota, New York, Maine, who I went to school with, and all Native people. Yeah, and then going to California, Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, it was another eye opener because the politics, I could fit into those politics. Because now we're looking at the 70s, we're looking at the mid 70s, and Randy Burns, Paiute, he had the nerve to start an organization called Gay American Indians. This is 1975. And I got there about 1977, 1978. And I went to the college and graduated in 81. And when I first went to the college, of course, we didn't have Facebook to interact. So it took me a couple of years to find the Native community. Meanwhile, I was taken care of by the Filipina community. And once I found the Native community, I worked with the San Francisco Indian Center, the Intertribal Friendship House in Oakland. I did graphics. I documented the community. I worked with Gay American Indians, not realizing how bold that was, because Randy would just say, "Hulleah, we need a flyer." I go, "Okay," make a flyer. "Oh, we need help at this event." Okay, yeah, okay. So the photo career was doing pretty good, and all during that time, since I was in the Bay Area, I started taking photographs of the community at different events. Gay American Indians, the runs, the protests, Alcatraz, not realizing I was making an archive. And over the years, that archive has become extensive. But so photography was my focus. And then I started getting some really nice gigs from different organizations. First People's Fund would send me out to photograph artists in different areas, Alaska, Maine, Union 1199 out of New York, the hospital workers union, hired me to photograph Native Women of Hope. And I went and photographed some incredible women, Hulleah Tsinhnahjinnie out of Hawaii, the dancers in Nevada, Wilma Mankiller and Oklahoma, Winona LaDuke, and Joanne Shenandoah. That career was going pretty good because I was focusing all my art, all my photography was focusing on the indigenous communities. Because again, thinking back to my dad and Hooked and Etsosi and those other artists creating curriculum for Rough Rock, I was creating images that were needed for the community. And they were images that were more, they're just not positive images with no content. There were images of people, portraits of people who did incredible things, or was documenting events that were incredible. That I had a sense that would go down in history. Yeah. So that part is really nice. And I even went to the Amazon and photographed the Witoto and Bora people down on the Amazon, and spent a week down there, going down to Peru and yeah. So that life was glamorous, and yeah, they got to travel a lot. So, but then the thought kept on coming in, what am I going to do when I get older? I can't keep this up. One doesn't have insurance. There's no security. And, what has longevity again? And hopefully, if I keep my mental functions, I always liked talking to people about politics. And that came from my mother. My mother was very political. And so I started looking back at teaching. And I had, been doing all these photo shoots and, pretty much having my name out there. And then the job came up for George Longfish. George Longfish calls me and he says, Hulleah, there's a job coming up. And I thought it was for his. He said, I heard Frank LaPena is going to retire at Sac State. He said, you should apply to it. I waited a little bit. I said, well, George, I want your job. He was quiet. He goes, okay. So he hangs up. And then about a couple years later, his job comes up. And I had gone back to school. I went to UC Irvine to get my master's because I knew this is what I want. I wanted George's job. I needed a master's, which is the terminal degree for artists. And so I had everything in line, and then the job opened up. I applied for it, and I got it. But I mean, yeah. So it was. There was preparation. There was a plan in a way, but never in my wildest dreams, when I was a teenager on a reservation, did I think I was going to become a full professor at UC Davis. And the journey to that was supported by a lot of people. My mother's belief in me, my father's creativity, my friends in the Bay Area. After I was in the Bay Area, I didn't return very often to the reservation because there was some violence in my family, and because being Two-Spirit, and so to keep myself safe, and I found a place that I could feel like I belonged. I stayed in that area and created community. So that community really supported me. And there were Navajos, there was Sioux, Lakota, Dakota, there were, different tribes, and, Paiute. And yeah, so it wasn't a journey that was, pull yourself up by your boots of straps or whatever they call it. Individualism. It wasn't an individual's journey. It was a journey where extended family helped out.
One of the things, I was fortunate enough to take one of your classes when I was completing my doctoral work up over at UC Davis, and I ended up taking one of your visual sovereignty classes, which has had a profound, long-lasting effect on not just my career, but also how we can take apart and analyze images on a daily basis of how specifically looking at Indigenous contexts. And so I was hoping that you'd be able to talk a little bit about those, your understanding of visual sovereignty and how it impacts us today.
There's, of course, for like the classes, there's an academic way you can approach it. And you can approach it with people with ideas, people who have written about it. You can talk about Jolene Ricker. You can talk about other people who have approached this idea. But I think who have written it down, and and it can be cited for it. But I think it's more inside a community. It's more inside an individual. Nobody ever wants to be imaged as a loser, as they say. Nobody wants to be imaged as defeated. Nobody wants to be imaged as less than. So taking control of that means a lot. That's a step that's a step towards taking control of one's image. And that's I guess that's what I saw. That's what I see in humanist photographers. They're trying to get beyond the image that is taken, the situation, the racism, the prejudice, the wars. They're trying to take it somewhere else, show what's happening, and then take it beyond that. So if we take visual sovereignty and we break it down, and it's just a very simple breakdown. We take the visuals that were made of Native people, and it was the early images from the outside, just basically for colonization. And how do you colonize? You break down a people, you break down a culture. And you can do that by showing them an image over and over of them being belittled. Then they start believing that image, because that's the only image they start seeing. But what I saw at Rough Rock in the early days was a community taking control of that image, taking control of those strategies of like teaching language, of teaching history, and turning it around. So that you're teaching Navajo, you're teaching Navajo history. You have Navajo teachers. You have Navajo illustrators for the books. You're creating your own books. I just turned a teenager when we arrived at Rough Rock from Phoenix. And that was impactful. So, I'm not the only one that has these type of experiences. So it's like everybody has an experience where you have an epiphany. And that epiphany, it blows your mind. And you say, this can be done. And again, it's just not just creating just positive images. It's creating images that are multi-layered in analysis, multi-layered in statements, multi-layered so that hopefully the images that I've taken or created that live on beyond me keep on growing, that they grow beyond my wildest imagination. And that's what I think, when we look at images, specifically images, historical photography of Native people, at first, they want us to look at subjugation. But if we look closer at those photographs and we scan them in at 800, 1200 DPI, and then we start looking at the detail. Look, they're still wearing this. Look, this looks like a sign of rebellion. You can read other things. Yeah, so that's for visual sovereignty, it's the enabling. And Jolene, it's not, I have to, it's sort of, it's not word for word, but it's from becoming a victim to taking control.
Of this piece, remember this piece that you did with the buffalo, the skinned buffalo and the horse, and just the changing of perceptions, and really because I work a lot with animal studies, and I work a lot with death of animals, and understanding how these interspecies communicate, and flipping colonization, right, and looking at all of these, you know, individuals who didn't ask to be part of, you know, what's going on. For me, you know, that kind of perspective opened up a tremendous amount of, you know, how just how we can visualize the world, and reutilize. I always tell my students, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm.
You know, all these images that you utilize, we could very easily just throw them out, but what you're doing with them and retooling them and giving a different agency to them than its original colonizing purpose, right? For me, though, that was so impactful in understanding about what we can do as Native peoples to not necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to take control. I know we talk about, you know, utilizing the enemy's language or reinventing the enemy's language. In this case, you're able to take those
Mm.
visual tools of assimilation, right? Tools of telling us that we don't exist, and here's the proof. You know, these are these dead animals. This is what the government wanted us to be as, but then to turn around and say, no, here we still are, and here's how we're going to continue. It was extremely impactful, at least for me. It was one of the basis of when we started creating the BFA program here
Mm.
at Diné College. I was like, no, we have to understand this visual sovereignty component, that we can ground ourselves in both the cultural arts and the fine arts, and we can take control of both to the point where we as Indigenous people are controlling the Southwest markets. We are the ones who are controlling what's going in these museums. We are the curators, and we're not just curating as, you know, Western trained museum curious. Not saying that's a bad thing, guys, but we
Yeah.
have now taken control. We can speak both languages, and we can put both of those worlds into one world as one person. And so I thought that was just the work that you do truly speaks to that ability to flip everything on its head,
Mm.
confuse people, at the same time make those thought-provoking social commentary that's much needed, especially in our museum realm and in our fine arts and cultural arts discussions. One of the other things that we are interested in taking a look at is, you know, how do you feel that your art serves your immediate community?
So this is a PowerPoint from Double Vision, and it has that image that you had. Of course, the Bay Area community, beautiful, you know, beautiful weather, beautiful, beautiful community. But always, you know, when I'm asked to come document, as long as I'm able to, I go. This is the Alcatraz. They have 2 Alcatraz visits during the year, one for Thanksgiving or giving thanks, and the other for International Indigenous Peoples Day, or what do they call it? But and it all includes going to the Pier 33 and catching a ferry at 5 o'clock in the morning, going to Alcatraz, and giving prayers at sunrise. And I've been documenting this for a while. And of course, I missed it some years because I either was out of town or something was happening. But you know, I try to make it every time. And what has happened is that over these years of creating this archive, now I have grandchildren coming to me asking me if I have photographs of the Indian Center from certain years, if I might have a photograph of their grandparents. And you know, usually I do. So having an archive that Native people can access to see their relatives is really important to me. the other thing is manipulating photographs, because like I said, you know, we're giving photographs of us in subjugation, taking those photographs, reinterpreting them so that we can send a message of our own. One of the things that I like doing, especially when eBay first came on, was to look for real photo postcards. And these were done late 1800s, early 1900s. And these real photo postcards, you would go to the studio, take your photograph, and then they would make it into a postcard, and you would send it to a relative. Of course, Native people were doing this also. So I found online an archive of a Choctaw family, and I bought it. And in it was this little baby on a postcard, on a swivel stool. And when I first saw this image of this baby, this is what I saw. And it's all about colonization. And it's reworking it so that you can see what the goal of the colonizer is. Not only do they want to colonize the world, but they want to colonize outer space. And so, but in this effort of colonization, they do not see people. They do not see animals. They do not see the spirit that is there. So when a spaceman goes to the moon, he doesn't see this little baby zooming around on her space scooter. And then all when she goes up to him, and then she scares him, and he runs off with his suitcases. So I mean, there's different sections of my work that repurpose older photographs and addresses political times. So this says, yeah, right, next you'll be, the person's asking, baby, how much land do you have? Yeah, right, next you'll be asking about my mineral rights. I was gifted about 55 photographs of early photographs from the 1900s of Osage when they had their oil money. This is an Osage baby. So all babies were like wrapped up in blankets and looking this, you know, had hair all over the place. So the Osages were in the middle of oil money, but also they were in the middle of evil because people wanted their money. So these photographs show it. They're witnesses to the times. Repurposing, when John Hillers went out to photograph the Zuni, repurposing and revisiting Wewa. You know, Wewa lived her life as a woman. She was born into the world as a man and was buried as a man. But during her time on Earth, she was a woman. And she went to Washington. She went to, She was an in-between in that she was able to go to the outside world and bring back what she considered would be beneficial for the tribe and teach the rest of the tribal members. There was a project that I did I looked at these old archival images by Jackson Brothers, and another photographer was asked to repurpose them. And so I would use ideas from oh, what's her name? What's the Maori writer's name?
Linda T. Smith.
Yeah, I would use ideas from Linda T. Smith's book and put them into these images of the idea that history is about us, which it is not. What is taught at, regular schools, it's not about us. Into the Huffman photographs. And of course, this is a time, 1880s, the buffalo is still really strong. We're looking at Montana. So I did a series of these. Today I was thinking, and it's a suite of 4. And commenting on our diet, how our diet has changed. The last one saying, real Indians eat curry. The Huffman photographs also look at taking of the tongues. So when you're reading a lot of Native history, especially about the buffalo, or just reading history, and you're given a nation building perspective of history, and then you're given history by your family of another perspective. And I always heard of stories about how these hunters would go out and shoot the buffalo and only take their tongue and leave the rest to rot. But you wouldn't believe this because you were raised well. You don't think people would do this. But then I found photographic evidence of this happening. And it doesn't have to say much, and it says taking of the tongues. And the visual fully impacts what your relatives have told you. And this was the repurposing that I did of it. We went from a native diet to what I would call a slave diet, fast food. Reusing that image again, creating United States of Amnesia. Now this is the one that you were showing. It's a Huffman stereo view, and it's called Killing of the Cows in Spikes, 1907. And you notice the horse there. Another quote from Linda T. Smith, the idea that the story of history can be told in one coherent narrative. Now, I think that's a really powerful statement. And the horse is saying, excuse me, I did not sign up for this. Also, so there are witnesses to these kinds of actions, but we don't recognize sometimes those witnesses. Those witnesses can be animals. Those witnesses can be a rock. Those witnesses can be birds. The witnesses can be the moon or the sun. So those who witness atrocities is not just limited to human observation, because we have to go beyond ourselves. Oh, that's my son. Yeah, so I take a lot of photographs of my family. And I did when I was on a reservation. I did when I was in Oklahoma. This is Amari. He's Pitt River. And we adopted him when he was 1. And it's, he's 13. He's going to be 13 this year. Yeah, and this is visiting the UBC, like photography, you can create a lot of images. It's incredible to me right now that all the statues are being torn down. I mean, it's a good start. This is a image that I created for Jack Forbes. Jack Forbes had an incredible mind, as you know, and one of his writings, he wrote about how in maps, the Western people have the world turned the wrong way. They have the North Pole as the top and the South Pole as the bottom. And why? And so he said, because for the Indian world, the top of the world is the East, because that's where the sun comes up. That's where our prayers go. The East is you know, that's the, if we were to have an Indian map of the world, East would be the top. And then when you look at the world in that different perspective, travel amongst South America, North America makes more sense. It makes it closer. It makes it, yeah, and what has been done is that these ideas, these perspectives have been taken from us, have been ridiculed. You know, traditional ecological knowledge, looking at, you know, basket weaving, looking at our medicines. You know, so that's what I wanted to put into this image that I dedicated to Jack Forbes.
Just the work that you do, it really is, it's quite innovative. And I was just giving a lecture yesterday on the ability to be able to, you know, use your creative mind to change the future, right? And I think that your imagery really helps to you create an immense amount of possibilities. And so for that, I personally, like I said, I thank you. And I think a lot of people who are going to be listening to this will start to really open up their horizons in terms of what they can do with their art. And so before we go ahead and start to sign off here, what's some encouragement or advice that you would give to younger artists, specifically younger Navajo artists?
If you don't go out your comfort zone, you're going to limit yourself. Look at the artists in New Zealand. Look at the artists in Australia. Look at the First Nation artists. Look at the fabric screen work in Africa, in India. You know, I mean, and you can do that now. Before it would take a great deal of effort. But now you can look up these artists online. You can see what people are doing. You can read people's biographies and why they're doing things. Sometimes some of the academic things written about Indigenous art are super textual, and you know, you read the first paragraph and you say, oh no. But usually the artists are able to, when they write about themselves, it's readable. You're able to take in what they say. So that's the other thing about young artists. Don't wait for somebody to write about you. You write about yourself. Because if you don't write about yourself, somebody will write about you and make you somebody else. So you take control of the writing. You can't say, no, I don't want to write about it. It's cool if you don't, but you will have more control if you do.
And with that, I want to say thank you, Hulleah. I truly appreciate you meeting with us, and I want to reach out to everybody who's watching and to remind you guys to please make sure that you guys do our surveys. The survey helps our program, helps to keep us funded, but it also gives some feedback to Hulleah. We'll go ahead and give your survey responses back to Hulleah so she can get a gauge and see what our now international audience has to think about some of the thoughts that we've been talking about today. And as a thank you, Hulleah has been kind enough to provide us with 2 prints that we will have printed out for 2 of our raffle winners. A little bit about this image.
This is the Wewa, the Beloved, and I was just wanting to pay homage to a Wewa, and of course now we label ourselves, some of us, Two-Spirit, and so Wewa was Two-Spirit back in the day, 1860s to about 1898, that sort of era. And she was such a community worker. She involved herself in the ceremonies, just and highly respected Zuni. And that, and the thing I think sometimes is that as Two-Spirit people, sometimes we need to just live our life. And that part of us that works with community. And when I need inspiration, I look at this image.
So here is another one of the images that will also be going up for raffle as well.
This is Adelia, and Gladys Ellenwood in San Francisco wanted me to take photographs of her family. And Adelia is her daughter. Adelia is half Navajo, and Nez Perce, her mother's Nez Perce. And so it was a black and white photograph originally. And then each year, or every other year, I would change the photograph to update it to what I wanted. And so this is one of the, this image was about 2000. And it was utilized for a census, Native American census for 2000 in California. But yeah, it pays homage to those who were on relocation.
We'll be raffling everything off next Tuesday at 3 o'clock Navajo Nation time. That's Mountain Daylight Savings time. So just a reminder, if you guys would like to be entered into the raffle for one of Hulleah's prints, there's 2 prints up in the raffle. You will just need to complete one of our surveys, and you can check that out below in the comments. We have a link to that online survey for you to complete, and we also want you to tag in support and recognition of anybody who identifies as Two-Spirit, an individual who supports Two-Spirit people, or who is an ally, what we would consider an ally. So I want to thank Hulleah. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been a pleasure seeing you. We will be back in 2 weeks with Barbara Teller and her sister Linda Teller. They are weavers, and we hope that you guys are continuing to enjoy our series, and we will be in contact with you guys in 2 weeks.
Go behaden steheyana hey yanga nejana go wo behaden steh nejana go wo behaden steh nejana go digin go behaden steheyana hey yanga